As soon as we start to work inside the UV editor window itself, one set of tools that we will quickly want to become familiar with are the Quick Transform options. These, as their name suggests, give us a set of controls that can be used to very quickly and easily manipulate sub-object selections on our UVW mesh. You will probably have already noted that the mesh we see in our 3ds Max viewport here has a little bit of a problem, in that the mapping on the knee section has clearly gone somewhat wrong. This is what we're going to use the Quick Transform tools to help fix. Indeed, if I select the geometry, jump over to the Modify tab, and then open up the UV editor window, we can easily see where the problem area lies, given that our mapping mesh has some very obvious overlap in the vertices here. To make certain that what we are looking at in the editor window does indeed correspond to the problem area in the viewport, we can select either the vertices or polygons in the editor window, and then just visually check that what we do have is a matching or corresponding selection in the 3ds Max viewport. Being in polygon mode, as you can see, does tend to make it easier to perform these kind of selection checks. When working with the Quick Transform tools, probably one of the first things we will want to mentally lock into place is the importance of the Set Pivot button set. The pivot point in a UV mesh subobject selection is the point around which our Quick Transform operations will take place. In fact, with a selection made, you can see as I rotate that this is indeed true. The Set Pivot options, if I just left click and hold, are a set of flyout controls that can be used to instantly set the pivot for a selection to a number of predetermined locations, specifically any corner of the selection bounding box, or, by default, the dead center. As I switch between these, you can hopefully just about make out the pivot being instantly relocated. Now, oftentimes, placing the pivot at any one of these preset locations will work just fine for us, given that they can help us perform very predictable transform operations. Sometimes, though, we may want or need things to work a little differently, which is where having the ability to select and move the pivot manually can come in really handy indeed. To do that, we can simply hover our mouse cursor above the pivot's current location, and as soon as we see the white crosshair, we can left-click and drag it to any location needed. Given that the first controls we will use in cleaning up our mapping are these rotate minus and plus 90 buttons, we can perhaps instantly see why having the ability to quickly and easily set the pivot point back to the selection center can be such an important feature. If I go ahead and just select the 4 vertices that are sitting inside the tangled area, and then, with the pivot set way out here for instance, apply a plus 90-degree rotation, we see what we get from that operation is perhaps not so helpful. If I undo that, however, set the pivot back to the center of the selection, and then apply the plus 90-degree rotation again, well, now we get something much more useful as we start to nicely untangle the UVW mesh. Not that the mapping we see in the viewports has, as of yet, noticeably improved, mind you. For that to happen, we will need to bring our UV mesh back into the 0 to 1 space, and then have it properly laid out. Before we get to that though, given that the majority of horizontal edges we see on this cluster are lying perfectly flat, let's go ahead and make use of the Align Horizontally to Pivot button in order to clean up the handful that, as of yet, are not. In this instance, we can either stay in vertex mode and select the vertices at either end of an edge, or we could switch to edge mode, select an edge with just a single click, and then hit the Align Horizontally to Pivot button in order to nicely straighten it out. Suppose, though, that whilst applying a straightening operation such as this, we really need to keep one of the vertices on an edge fixed in place. Well, in that case, we could make our edge selection, grab the pivot point, and then place it over the vertex that we want to keep locked in place, the middle mouse zoom function being a big help to us here. Now when we go ahead and use the Align Horizontally to Pivot button, the operation gets performed around the pivot's current location, keeping the vertex sitting under it nicely locked down. Let's quickly finish off the rest of our horizontal edges here. And then, switching to vertex subobject mode, grab all of the vertices currently sitting outside of the UV square, and this time align them using the Align Vertically to Pivot Point button. Our mapping in the viewport is, as you can see, starting to clean up very nicely. In fact, all we need to do now is place the currently selected vertices back where they belong, which is inside the 0 to 1 space. Of course, having taken the time to level out all of our edges here, the last thing we will want to do is perform a sloppy manual move. So let's hold down the Shift key in order to constrain ourselves to a single axis move, and then drag the vertices back where they belong. Another way we could have accomplished this, if I just hit Ctrl and Z or Z to undo here, would be to have placed the pivot point over one of the existing vertices that we want to align to, and again use the Align Vertically to Pivot option, which of course snaps everything nicely into place. Over in the viewport, we see that our mapping now looks clean and evenly spaced, meaning we are ready to move on and take a look at the tools found in the next UV Editor rollout, this being Reshape Elements.